Hello, everyone. This is a special report I'm doing with Dave Beaty, the creator of the Nimitz Encounter film. Dave is a filmmaker, a UFO researcher, and was a former television journalist. He has done films for History Channel, PBS, and Travel Channel. Thank you, Dave, for being on the show today.
Thank you, Chant. It's great to be here.
I wanted to ask you a few questions. The question I wanted to ask you first was, there's a new witness from the sonar operators that you and Gary have been discussing. How did you track him down? What's his story?
Yeah, Gary probably has mentioned this, in the show, and it's really interesting to me that when the witnesses see the film and they see the show on the History Channel Unidentified, I think that has in some ways allowed them to kind of come forward because they see that other people are interested in this and talking about it. So we've had several, Navy veterans come forward and talk to, Jason and Kevin and Gary and Patrick, saying, yeah, I was there. And one of the gentlemen that you may have already heard the story sort of confirmed to Gary that, he was there in combat information in the sonar department that week in November. And, I guess that he was, from his perspective, they didn't see any contacts under the water, which is sort of new information. Somebody else had mentioned to Gary that there were contacts under the water. And this guy, basically said that's incorrect. And again, I don't want to kind of repeat this because I think Gary's already mentioned it in the show, but it's pretty interesting new information.
And I would like to make it clear for our listeners that Dave is talking about Gary Voorhees. Is that correct?
That's right. I sometimes assume people know who I'm talking about, and we do have to mention that Gary Voorhees, who's the fire controlman on the USS Princeton.
Wonderful. A member of the USS Nimitz CDC watch team, also known as Combat Direction Center, from the OI division on the carrier says he saw something truly amazing on radar the whole week.
Yeah, now that one is really interesting because there's been very, very few witnesses that have come forward from USS Nimitz. Obviously, you're talking to aviation tech Patrick Hughes, that was a member of the Wallbanger Squadron for the E-2 Hawkeyes early warning airplanes. And, his story is pretty remarkable. I have an email address in the film asking people to come forward. So sometimes I'll get an email from military service members. In this case, I got an email from a gentleman that said that he was in the CDC, combat space within the Nimitz aircraft carrier. And that's similar to the CIC, or Combat Information Center, on the USS Princeton, sort of the nerve center of the ship with all the radars and so on. And this gentleman indicated that he had seen all of the unknown tracks that were going on that week of November, around November 10th through, I think, the 15th or 16th, that whole time frame. He said that, he indicated that he was aware of even some other areas. He hasn't cleared that up for me yet, but he said that there's some areas where these contacts occurred that aren't mentioned in the film. So I'm trying to find out, where those things were. Obviously, Kevin was seeing them coming south from San Clemente Island, at 28,000 feet, Catalina Island in that area, going south down to Guadalupe Island off the coast of Baja, Mexico during that week. This gentleman said there was some other area, so I'm not sure what he meant by that. But one of the things that he said that was really, really interesting to me, that I have never heard anyone talk about this. He said that, what about the meeting? And I said, he said, you didn't mention the meeting. And he said the meeting was at Sims Hall and Point Loma. And he said it was the ASW base. So that's all he said at first. And I had to go back and look and find that. And doing a quick search, I realized that that's a part of the Navy base there in San Diego. And it's this part of the submarine base. It's anti-submarine warfare. And I found, if you go Sims Hall, like SIMS Hall, it shows it on Google Earth as this building. So I said to him, what was this about? And he said that after the Nimitz came back to the pier after that November encounter and that training exercise, that all the people that were involved with the unknown UFOs were asked to go to Sims Hall. So it wasn't like everybody, it was just a specific group of individuals. And he said that once they were in Sims Hall, these individuals, and he didn't say who they were, and he said he didn't know them, addressed the group and basically told them that, quote, "We don't know what those things were, but we don't want you talking about it nonetheless." So they were instructed by some type of officials not to talk about this event. And he's actually been very hesitant to tell me anything. I mean, he didn't give me his name. And I did have Patrick Hughes, who was a U.S. Nimitz vet, sort of talk to this gentleman and ask him a whole bunch of questions about what his job was and what he claimed he did. And Patrick said he pretty much checked out as far as he's concerned. I mean, we haven't gone so far as to get paperwork as far as like his DD 214 form from the military and all that, but at this point, he seems pretty legit, and it's kind of interesting information. One of the things he said, because I was asking, well, who was at the meeting? And he said, all the people that were involved in this. And he said, and the pilots. And I don't know which pilots were there. He said, apparently, according to him, there were some pilots at this meeting in Sims Hall. So it's all new information sort of breaking right now.
Understood. Dave, regarding FOIAs and missing deck logs, which docs are missing? Chris Mellon mentioned this on Unidentified, the History Channel show Unidentified.
Yeah, that's right. Back when we were first investigating this case, we were trying to get the deck logs of all the vessels that were there to try to correlate the timing and to see if there was any mention of unknown objects or anything unusual in those logs. Deck logs are usually created on the bridge of the ships, where the watchstanders are noting everything that happens on the bridge, including mundane details such as the speed, the direction, the weather, when they turn the lights on, that small detail, when the captain arrives and everything else. Well, we got the deck logs from the Nimitz, but when we tried to get the deck logs from the USS Princeton, the Navy came back and told us that they're missing. And it seemed to be highly unusual. The individual that I was working with at the Navy was helpful, and I asked, is that common? And she said it was highly unusual that would occur, that they're required to, submit every year their deck logs to this archive in the Navy, and that she had no explanation. And because it had been so long, over, 13 years or whatever, that it would be pretty hard to find out why they didn't submit the logs. They said that they also went to Naval Intelligence to see if there was any chance that they were routed over there, and they got a negative reply back on that as well. And I said, well, what would be some reasons that you wouldn't have it submitted? And she said, well, one reason could be that the document was classified, but she said that it was pretty highly unlikely in the case of a cruiser in a training environment like that would have that log classified. She just didn't think that was likely. Now, on the show Unidentified, Chris Mellon said that they looked in the National Archives, and I guess that's the same thing. We were looking in, a department of the Navy, Naval History, and maybe that's what he was talking about. So those logs are missing.
That's very odd, and I don't think that's coincidental either. The female pilot has come forward on the History Channel's Unidentified show. You talked about it last May, Dave. No one believed you. However, Frank and I did. What about what she said?
Yeah, I mean, that was surprising to me, because all this time, we were sort of aware of that. And I don't know, when I first was bringing it up and inquiring with some of the pilots, I thought that they didn't like the fact that I was bringing it up, because from what I understand, they were covering for her. She didn't want her name out there. She didn't want anyone. They never mentioned a female pilot ever in all of the news reports and all of the publicity they did on every major news show on the New York Times, no one ever said female pilot. They always made it seem like Lieutenant Commander Jim Slate was the other pilot. And they kind of got around that by saying he was the wingman. But you would assume that he was the pilot then. But I found out just by putting pieces together that it seemed to be this lieutenant, a younger pilot that was on her first carrier deployment. So I was putting that out there the whole time. I forget when the first confirmation was, but I guess I'd have to say it was unidentified. Episode 1, where there she is in silhouette, with her identity hidden, and she's talking, and we're hearing her for the first time. No one had ever heard her voice. She had written her description of the events in what's called the Pilot's Report, which is found on the To the Stars Academy's community interest website. You can find that there now. It gives no indication of gender at all, but that's her. It's a lot of detail. If you read that, you understand where her mindset was that day. She was frightened, actually, of this occurrence. She was concerned about it, especially when the controllers began asking about weapons. And at that point, this is post 9/11. You have to realize that this is several years after civilian aircraft had been, hijacked and flown into, our national, Pentagon and the whole thing, and the World Trade Center. People were on edge about airplanes that don't have transponders, that are flying around and no one can contact them. So she was concerned. They're asking about weapons. So she thought maybe that this was some type of civilian plane that had been hijacked that might be flying into the carrier or something like that. They didn't know what it was at that point. So you imagine, they're asking about weapons. She's thinking, what are we going to do if we get out there and it's like some type of terrorist or something? We have no weapons. And you could tell, there was that concern in her voice. I know that, since then, other people have commented that she, if this was like our technology in the end, these objects, that she would also be furious that they would put their own air crews in a situation like that, where they're going into something that's like our own technology, what they call blue on blue. So again, it's really, really interesting to hear her comments on that show. I actually thought it was great. So
just a side question here. Have you ever had contact with her, ever had the opportunity to speak with her, or do you wish to? I made a pledge back when I first started talking to some of the pilots that I had no intention of using her name. I had no intention of talking to her, that I respected her wishes to remain anonymous. The only thing that I wanted to do is do a recreation that got the facts right, which is if there's a female flying the jet, I wanted to say there was a female in the jet. I had enough information from the pilot's report, which is her description of the whole event, to write a script about it. So I didn't really feel I needed to. I mean, obviously I'd love to talk to all of them, but again, because I made that pledge, I stuck with it. I've never attempted to contact her. I've never used her name. Understood. Dave, there have been several versions of the film, the Nimitz Encounter, one in November 2018 with Commander Fravor, then another version in April 2019, and the one now, which totals what appears to be 3 versions of the same documentary, with several more witnesses added to that new documentary. Why do you keep changing it, Dave?
Well, one reason is because new information keeps coming out. Another thing, when I first started contemplating putting this film together, I figured I'm not going to play by the rules. I'm not going to do something just because you have to make a film that's goes out there and it's done. And then you move on and never look at it again. My feeling was look, this is the internet. I could post the same film and add stuff to it every month for the next 10 years if there was new information. The ending isn't written yet. So I went into it with this idea. This is a non-linear film. It's basically going to evolve over time. As the story changes, like we were talking about with the underwater UFOs and the sonar guys saying that didn't happen. Well, if that's wrong, then the film, the next version has to change to evolve, and as these new witnesses come out. The first version, I didn't have any of the witnesses that are in the film now. I didn't have them on camera. All I had was, the Commander Fravor interview, which I had received permission from To the Stars Academy to use this little snippet of this interview on their website. So then moving forward into, that next year, I got word from them that Commander Fravor saw the film, it had become pretty popular, like 1.5 million views. And he didn't want his interview used in the film because he said that it was only for To the Stars, only for their website. And he wanted it taken out of my film that, for whatever reason. But I respect that. I respect people's wishes. Even though I had gotten permission from To the Stars, again, I had never been able to contact Fravor myself, even though I did send him an email and so on. I just wasn't able to talk to him. So I figured I had to take it out. So the next version that came out was, it had some of the witnesses, but phone interviews. I still didn't have a chance to get in person and do interviews on camera with them. So the next version that came out, I think in March 2019, featured those telephone interviews, for instance. And I mentioned a few of the other guys had some still photos and so on of them. Later that month, I got together with them out in Nevada at the UFO MegaCon event, and I seized that opportunity. I mean, I had 4 of the witnesses. Actually, I helped kind of put them in touch with the coordinators of that event. And so, we were all going to be there at the same time. I was like, this is a perfect opportunity. So I brought my camera equipment out there and interviewed each one of those guys. So I got Kevin Day from the Princeton, like Gary Voorhees from the Princeton, Jason Turner from the Princeton, and Patrick Hughes from the Nimitz. And we just went outside of town there in the beautiful Nevada desert and canyon, and spent an hour with each one of them, kind of talking about the events, and they explained everything that happened to them that week. I plan, by the way, on releasing each one of those interviews in its entirety, which, again, that's a whole another video for people that enjoy this topic and see coming up soon. I'll put that on my YouTube channel. So now that I had those four interviews, what I did is I rewrote the script to incorporate what they had said. And so coming up, we looked at the schedule, and we noticed that the History Channel show is going to be airing, I think, the next weekend. It would have been like May 31st or 1st or something like that, right? Right? May 1st, I think. So we were like, well, we'll launch ours the weekend before that. Sunday's a good night. So we scheduled the release of the film on April 26th. Just so happened, I didn't know this, just so happened that, that was the same day that New York Times article came out. But anyways, that's the story of why. And of course, in this version, we don't have Commander Fravor since he wanted to be taken out, and that's why he's not in it.
Understood. By the way, the video that you did, the Nimitz Encounters documentary, that was wildly and is wildly popular on Amazon. Is it still there on Amazon?
It's not on Amazon right now. I'm doing a new audio mix, and I'm going to, as soon as I get that new audio mix, I'm going to put it back. The one that was on Amazon going back to last year had Commander Fravor in it. So as you know, since I had to take that, I agreed to take that out. I pulled it off of Amazon, but I'll let you guys know. It'll be up there soon.
Good. I just wanted to clear that up so folks understand that, because but folks, when they think about the Nimitz Encounter documentary you did, they automatically think about Amazon. And so although you made it very clear regarding sort of the provenance, the history of events regarding what has happened, it's still important for folks to understand whether it's there on Amazon or not. But it will be going back up again soon on Amazon. Is that correct? In a different format?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, got it. All right. Has anyone from TTSA or History Channel ever contacted you, Dave?
No one's contacted me from the from aside from the little Commander Freyberg deal there. No one's contacted me from TTSA. No one from History Channel's unidentified shows contacted me, but just recently, within the last month, I was contacted by the show In Search Of, which is that new History Channel show that they explore sort of mysteries and so on. It's a remake of the 70s show with Leonard Nimoy, actually. It's a pretty interesting show. Yeah. So they contacted me and said, Dave, we absolutely love the graphics that you did in the Nimitz Encounters. Is there any possibility that we can source some of those computer graphics for an upcoming episode that we're going to be doing on UFOs and so on? And I was like, more than happy to provide that, for them. So I'm anxious to see what's going to become of that.
That's fantastic. Congratulations regarding that. Dave, what about NDAs in reference to the Navy?
There's been a lot of questions about that because in my documentary, there's a scene where I show that, and people have over and over said, how can these guys come forward with these stories if they sign NDAs? That is impossible. They would be in jail. This isn't wrong. It's a lie. Well, if you really watch the documentary, you would understand there's only one individual that claims to have signed an NDA, and he's not in the film other than other people mentioning him. We use, a pseudonym for him called Roger. He doesn't want to come out. He doesn't want his name used. He contacted me early on. Patrick Hughes knows this gentleman personally, and basically they vouch for each other of this event. And this person basically said that when they landed on the carrier after their mission with the E-2 Hawkeye, they were brought down into the ship and they had to sign NDAs. Now, it's my understanding that the subject matter of the NDA is a classified sensor, and that's what they can't talk about, not necessarily the Tic Tac UFO per se. Everyone else is talking about the Tic Tacs, as you know. So I think that while he did sign an NDA, he hasn't really broken that, unless just saying that you sign one is against it. I don't know. So
that's a very good point, actually. Wanted to ask you, the military having allegedly taken data, which was considered key evidence to this Nimitz event. How do we know that's accurate?
Well, hopefully Patrick has clarified that, and I think that in my in my documentary film, we spend several minutes with him telling the story of what happened. There's been a few people that have verified that as well. That are sort of, they don't want to come forward at this time, but they served together with Patrick, as well as Roger and so on in that Wallbangers workshop. And there were several people that witnessed these guys coming in, and Patrick, said that they were Air Force officers that came with his CO, came in there and said, we want that hard drive that came off of the E-2 Hawkeye plane that had witnessed these Tic Tac things. And Patrick said it was highly unusual, but he took them out of the safe and signed it out to these guys and they left. And, I actually put it together with Gary, because I was asking Gary afterwards. I said, Gary Voorhees from the Princeton, I said, Gary, did anyone ever take any of your data? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, what do you mean, yeah? When? He's like, right after the event. I'm like, man, how come you didn't tell me that? You didn't ask me. So these Navy guys are like that. You have to realize that you really have to ask them specific questions because they're not going to volunteer it. But Gary said that, okay, that's not important. But Gary said that these guys came on board on a helicopter maybe a few hours or whatever, an hour or so after this event with the Tic Tacs and so on. And he was in charge of tape recordings of data from the CIC. And they wanted those tapes, and this is like the Aegis combat system. And they took the tapes, and he had to sign them out, chain of custody, and they made him erase all of the other tapes he had left that were, even if they were blank, like just tape, cassettes, so that there was nothing left on the ship that had any evidence. Is there another system called the CEC? And he said they erased that. So pretty much all this data that was, probably capturing these tic tacs on radar and so on seems to be gone. So
understood. I actually want to make a comment. I've had a lot of family members and friends who have been in the military, and I used to hear this kind of comment a lot, and that is, once you join the military, they own you. And whether it's an expression or not, or it's literal, they literally can come in and they can make you do something like that, such as erase tapes. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, I think Gary put it bluntly when people would say, if they said, give us the tapes, and then people would say, well, why did you give it to them? And it's because you'll go to jail if you refuse to do it. You want to go to jail. I guess his chain of command or whatever, these people that came on board were the kind of people that you didn't question, and they could do anything that they wanted. That's what he said.
Understood, and I believe him. Dave, one of the pilots said there's no longer video from FLIR 1, but Jason Turner said there is. Has anyone else confirmed that?
Yeah, that's a question in relationship to the length of the video that we have that was released to the public. The FLIR 1 is the one with the little fuzzy white egg-shaped object in the center of the screen. It's about 1 minute 16 seconds, the one that was released. Well, as Jason has said, Jason Turner from the U.S. Princeton has said that there's a much longer film that he saw it in the ship's secure space that he was in. I guess he was shown that by another veteran that at that time, said, take a look at this. And he said it was probably somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes in length. So that's one person's observation. Since that time, there's been a few other individuals that have sort of clarified that in some ways. And again, some of this stuff I don't even ask, it just comes forward. Researcher Robert Powell just last week indicated to me that in his interviews with Lieutenant Commander Jim Slate, Jim indicated that when the jets take off from the aircraft carrier, if they're carrying the targeting pod like the FLIR system, as soon as they get up in the air and they're turning that on, getting ready for the mission, getting ready to use it, for instance, they would begin recording right then when they're setting it up. They don't want to wait until they're in the thick of it, where they're, in some type of engagement to try to hit the record button. There's no reason to do it like that. They start the recording when they begin the mission. It's normal procedure. And I think that could be verified by other weapons system officers, for instance. But so they take off, and you can imagine that they're flying out 60 miles or something from the ship. There's going to be a longer recording. Now, where that went after the mission, what happened to it, we don't know. The one website that originally leaked it back in 2007, there was an individual called The Final Theory, his username. He claimed that he had access to that film, and the short one was leaked onto the internet. Researcher Isaac Hoy this week has been communicating with this individual. He changed his name to The Final Theory Returns. And Isaac thinks it's the same person. And I believe that he did say that there was a longer film, that they weren't able to play it for some reason. That's what the statement was, but that the one existed. So who has seen it? Aside from Jason, I'm not sure, but that's the story.
Yeah, it sounds like an X-Files episode. Wanted to ask you, Dave, could you please go into an interesting topic here that I really deeply admire you for having the passion to do, and that is starting a forum regarding the military, police, and pilots, so that they have the ability to go ahead and network and talk about their experiences regarding UAPs. Is that correct?
Yes, that's something that I'm working on. It's a work in progress. If you go to my website, the NimitzEncounters.com, you'll see a page there that sort of describes the inception of that. We also started a Facebook page of the same name, and it's called the Military, Police, and Pilots UAP Network. And the acronym for that would be the same of those letters. So the reason that I thought this was a good idea was when I got all of the witnesses together, when I began forming groups of the Princeton and Nimitz witnesses, I sort of witnessed this really remarkable thing occurring, which was it seemed to really help these guys. I mean, they were struggling in some cases with this information. They really hadn't talked about it in many, many years, and having other guys to talk about it with seemed sort of vindicating in a way that they didn't have to think that they were losing their minds and it didn't really happen. You know, in some cases, they were told this didn't happen back then, you know, forget about it sort of thing.
Right.
And now being able to talk about it and having, you know, the courage to come forward, I think was because other people had their backs. And I was like, this is one of the best things of this whole case. We should try to duplicate this. And I looked out there to see if there was anything really formalized that was easy to find for people that, you know, kind of wanted, they didn't have to have a report, that perhaps they just wanted to talk to other vets that had experiences and so on. So that's really kind of my initial reason for doing this. And I'm really hoping that it takes off.
There was a period of time where the general consensus between pilots, if they had ever seen an anomalous object in the sky back in the day, to not say anything about it publicly. Now, they might talk to radar operators about it or report it sort of quietly, but it never went beyond a circle of people. Isn't that correct? And nowadays, it seems to be a little bit better in the respect that if pilots see anomalous objects, they're more likely to talk about it than ever before. Is that right?
I hope so. We've learned that the U.S. Navy has sort of been putting in some new guidelines for Navy pilots to report unidentified objects, for instance. I know that there were some briefings in Washington that were dealing with that. And from my understanding, that those new policies have actually been implemented. I hope so. You know, as far as civilian pilots, you know, the conversation needs to continue. I think there's still stigma attached to it. You know, it's your career, and reporting this stuff can have negative ramifications for somebody that, you know, is a commercial pilot with one of the major airlines, for instance. You might not report something because of the stigma, and I hope that that does change as we move forward.
I also wanted to ask you a question about that. What good does it do the pilots to say anything at all? Really, I mean, if they're put in a position where they're being scrutinized possibly heavily by the public, what is the point of them saying anything if they have witnessed any kind of anomalous activity in the skies?
Well, you're absolutely right. Number one, they might think about it for a while, take a day or two to think if they don't report it right away, and they would play it out and say, what good is it going to do? What is going to happen if I report this? And really, I don't know a positive benefit for the pilot, you know? I mean, especially if it's just one guy or something, you know, I can think of a lot of negative things. So I think that it's way underreported. I think that there's probably significant events that have not been reported.
Yeah, I think the cons outweigh the pros in that respect. So it's interesting that UAPs are becoming more mainstream regarding the news. So hopefully that will still help become an impetus for pilots to report, and it will be more a commonplace for that to happen if they see an anomalous object in the sky that they cannot explain. Dave, do you think what the anomalous objects these pilots saw was derived from ET technology, or was it man-made?
I'm usually on the fence about that. I always say, I don't know. I really don't know. On one day, I might be on the side of, wow, this is like some black super black aircraft project, special access, Area 51. I have trouble linking Bob Lazar's, sports model with this Tic Tac. I mean, I don't know. I'm just not going to go there. But, could it be some other type of intelligence that we're unaware of? Maybe. Is it related to the ocean? I mean, 95% of the ocean is unexplored, and there's some deep ocean, even out there, it's pretty deep. They seem to, from all the reports that I've gotten over the years, they seem to have some under the water and coming out of the water. There's a lot of reports of that. So that's quite interesting idea. Now, on the flip side, the man-made stuff, I could possibly see that if you would erase the physics-defying part of it, the anti-gravity part of it. I just don't know if we have anti-gravity, physics bending, space-time bubbles, metric engineered craft that can go, tens of thousands of miles an hour or hundreds of thousands of miles an hour and stop instantly and go the other direction. I mean, if we have that technology, we should be living in a utopian society with hovercrafts and green energy and a little cube that powers a city. We wouldn't need to be polluting our environment with gas combustion turbine engines, and the whole thing. We would have solved a lot of that problem. So, I'm like, do we really have that? If we do, I mean, come on, it's time to give it to us, right? Release that technology.
Yes, agreed. By the way, one of the topics you mentioned regarding possible USO activity, I do have a question from Tom Whitmore regarding that a little bit later on. So I wanted to ask you, there have been some DARPA drone projects circulating lately. Are those the drones do you think they're drones that the pilots saw, in other words?
Well, some people have sent me a lot of links lately to these both underwater drones, vehicles. And, what they say is DARPA is trying to develop these systems that would be an underwater vehicle that would go to a location. It would surface and deploy drones, for surveillance or whatever. And I believe that stuff is going to really come true. Now, again, I could see something like that for intelligence gathering or even as decoys to confuse, say, an enemy air force or something. But again, we still haven't seen this gravity-defying hypersonic drones. Drones travel slow. They have propellers, they have, most drones have rotors and so on. They don't go 24,000 miles an hour. So, and there's very few that can go from the air underwater. So, I believe that technology is there. I just don't think that that's what we're seeing. Now, as far as anomalous undersea objects, USOs, for instance, I believe that is true. And just recently I was contacted by a submariner, a U.S. Navy submariner. Now, I haven't vetted the guy. I believe him. He's saying that he served, he gave me the name of the sub that he served aboard. He said that they do report under USO contacts that he said he's even witnessed them going in excess of 500 knots underwater. He said it happens. So, I believe it.
Yeah, very good points. Thank you. I wanted to ask you, on May 26th, the New York Times broke the story on the USS Roosevelt in 2015, and that was the same day you released the latest Nimitz movie. What do you think about that article, Dave?
In some ways I feel vindicated, because if you guys remember back in November of 2018 when we first came out with the film, at the end of the film we show a picture of the gimbal film, and there's a little graphic there, and the narrator says, this is the gimbal film captured by the air crews on the USS Roosevelt. And on the screen it says estimated date of January 26, 2015. that information wasn't out in the public, and a small core group of researchers, including Christophe Spitzer out of France and Keith Basterfield out of Australia, and myself, had been for months kind of bantering back and forth. And Christophe had done this document where he put all this information that had information about the wind at 20,000 feet that the pilots reported as being 120 knots out of the west. He put together information about commercial airline flights that were diverted around the coast of Florida in that month. They looked at weather patterns and frontal patterns that would show clouds that had similar patterns to what we saw in the gimbal at that altitude. I got the final thing was I got the FOIAs for the USS Normandy, which is it's basically like the USS Princeton, but for the Roosevelt. It's the cruiser. The cruiser, is right with the aircraft carrier. So we had this cruiser out there. We could track where it was in the ocean in January. And putting it together, we kind of figured out where the aircraft carrier was. We figured out what the air crew was that was flying off there. We even had all the names. So after the article came out in the Times, I went back to our documents and I looked at the names. I'm like, oh, there's like Lieutenant O'Coin. Yep, we had him. We hadn't gotten to the point of trying to go out and contact all these guys, and it's kind of actually hard, You call like a pilot and say, hey, I'm a UFO researcher. Can we talk to you?
Right, exactly.
Yeah, you hear click, Right. But so anyways, it was vindicating in a sense that they had this information from To the Stars, from ATIP. Apparently, that's where To the Stars got it, Luis Elizondo and so on. We already had it, and we were right.
That's incredible. I wanted to move on to a few of Frank Stalter's questions. Now, you may have already answered some of these, so we'll just go ahead and skip over those if I already asked you those questions. One of the questions is, has the finished Nimitz Encounter movie exceeded your expectations going in?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I'm up to 1.8 million views on YouTube this week of, I never expected it to be that popular.
That's incredible.
I've received, calls from around the world. And
that's wild. 1.8 million, did you say that?
Yeah, 1.8 million this week.
Wow. Okay, would like to also ask you, the film succeeds both in content and technically CGI's effects / stock footage. At what point did you realize both these aspects of the films were going to be great?
When it was finished. Yeah, when I started, I wasn't too sure. I thought, that's what happens a lot of times in this production world. It's like you start out unsure, especially with CGI, that it might look cheesy, it might look hokey and kind of fake, but the technology is remarkable. It really is. And there's certain scenes in there that people, I read the comments, they really think it's real. And these are people that are on computers, and they're like, how did you get a shot of the Tic Tac, or something? And like, they really thought it was a real video because the CGI looks kind of real. It's they call it photorealistic.
Yeah.
And they thought that I had somehow, they're like, how did you get the radio recordings? Of course, I have to preface that and say, yeah, but there's like a lot of other comments that are like, that is the worst voice acting I've ever heard in my life. But I'm like, all right, I'm going to tell Nancy, my wife, that somebody's criticizing her who,
by the way,
like here, I always do, like, I can do my, what's one of the lines? He says like, hey, are you guys seeing this? Remember, that's one of the lines.
Yes,
that was me.
That's hilarious. By the way,
that didn't happen.
Just curious. Do you have a moderator who takes care of the if there's 1.8 million views, the thousands upon thousands of comments, or do you just let them have at it? You
Hi,
do.
that's
right,
me.
It's you. Okay, understood.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, sometimes I have fun with it. I insult a lot of people, believe me. Because you know how they troll you on YouTube,
yes,
but I sometimes will sit down there at night and spend a couple hours just answering every one of those.
That's incredible amount of devotion on your part, Dave. Okay, we're still talking about Frank here regarding his questions. How much have you used Cinema 4D before this film, and what were the biggest challenges in using it and getting things right?
I've been using it for a long time. I mean, it's part of my production arsenal. So, my whole career, basically, I was always on Maxon. Now, the challenges, I think, of doing realistic looking stuff is the time invested in the rendering. That would be what I would say. The longer that the computer generates one frame, the better it looks. So if I had forever, or if I had, a render farm, they call it, with 20, computers all churning at the same time, I could do more. I didn't have that resource, and I had to dumb it down a little bit, basically, the quality wise. Hollywood feature may use those types of processing power to do really high end looking photorealistic stuff, but I was able to cut corners, and it did take me about 6 months to do all the different stuff. So that's the challenge. It's just the amount of time it takes to crank out, say, 5 seconds of animation might take 10 hours of computing power.
Understood. If you had an unlimited budget, what are some of the things you would like to have done in the film but could not?
Well, number one, I wouldn't have to use synthetic actors. That was the one thing that I didn't like doing, but I didn't have a choice. That means the in cockpit views. I would really love to see, people in their flight suits with helmets, oxygen mask inside, whether it's green screen or whatever, but inside a cockpit where you actually are doing these, actors acting out the scenes, which would be so much more powerful. And I, of course, would have really loved to get access to the vessels, the Navy vessels, where, you commission the Navy and say, we want to use one of your vessels that's sitting in port or something like that to go on and do some of these recreations. I mean, those are the only things that I wish I could have done that there was just no budget to do. So
right. Still Frank's questions. Can you talk a little bit about the first on-ship Nimitz Encounter witness that came forward, and how did you handle all of that?
I think that going back to the very beginning, in 2018 when this first started happening, Commander Fravor, Commander Slate were all on TV. I tried to contact all of them in the beginning. I mean, they were the only ones that we knew about. Commander Slate was polite. When he was the only pilot I got a hold of. He was really polite, and he seemed enthusiastic about talking to me, and that he said he would answer any questions. Unfortunately, the first question I asked him was about the female pilot, and I think that was a big mistake, as I've said before, because that was like the last question he ever asked, and he ended up saying that he was busy working on contracts and ending the conversation. So I never got any more with that, and I've learned a lot since then that maybe you should, kind of do softball questions with some of these guys first and don't go for the jugular or whatever. So that I learned a lot. Some of the other guys that came forward have been wonderful, just the opposite, that are willing to answer any questions and really feel, I think, humbled by the experience. And, that would be the guys that have been on the show, and like Kevin and so on. So.
Oh, that's wonderful. Have any fakers tried to get through your vetting process, and how did you figure them out?
No one's gotten through. I get a lot of emails, hundreds and hundreds of emails. And I think that, there are some people that want to sort of test the defenses or something, or they're just, pranking or whatever. But no one, even in the very beginning, if someone said I was on the ship, and then I would ask a few questions, I'd never hear from them again, whether they really were. Several people claim that they were, for instance, in Patrick's squadron. And he could very quickly, determine that they were not. And that person then would just kind of disappear. So far, as far as I'm concerned, the people that we have are who they say they are.
Understood. This is the last question from Frank Stalter. Are the other Nimitz Encounter witnesses helping in any vetting process? Oh, this is the second to the last question. I apologize. I'm going to ask it again. Are the other Nimitz Encounter witnesses helping in any vetting process?
Yeah, I mean, as I just said, I think that when I'm unsure and I want somebody that has experience sort of on the inside that can talk the talk, they are going to know way before me if this person who says he had a specific job on the ship is who he said he is. So as soon as I get that contact going, I may bring one of them in to help me vet the witness.
Understood. This is the last question from Frank Stalter. What is the best thing to have happened to you since starting this project, Dave?
I think the best thing is all the friends that I've made. I don't think that I ever expected to have this group of former Navy veterans that I consider my good friends. And, even one of them said that I'm their honorary brother because they all call each other brothers. And I think that they just appreciate the fact that I've been honest and forthright with them, and everything that I've tried to do, I've been trying to maintain that, those ethics and so on, and trust, basically. And that's kind of the best thing, is just having these new friends.
One short question before I begin some serious other questions. Not that Frank's questions weren't serious, by the way. He's going to laugh when he hears that. One short question I have for you is, how many hundreds of hours did it take for you from the very point of the inception of the Nimitz Encounter project, no matter how many different times you have remade this documentary, up until today, have you invested on this project?
I try to avoid thinking about that, because if I realized it, I would probably think, man, I'm working cheap. I should be paying myself a lot more, because I don't have too much to show for that, but I started working at it, January 2018, and, I finished the last cut. I'm still working on it a little, but the last one was, in April of this year. So how many months now? Back when I was really cranking away at it, I was spending, thousands of hours.
Wow.
I never kept a timesheet on it, but there's a lot of hours in there.
So just to be more direct in my question, you could probably do a little forensic research on your computers and add up that time, because it should be logged there, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I could.
Yeah, you probably could do that. Okay, on to another question. You and a few key people who have the same interests, who have a long history together, when did you both connect and start to share a common interest in UFOs?
And I didn't understand that one. Me and who?
You and certain people that might be close to you regarding the Nimitz Encounter project, who have the same interests as you regarding having a long friendship, a long history of friendship together. When did you all connect and start to share a common interest in UFOs? Do you have a long friendship with anybody in the UFO community who has been with you from the very beginning of the Nimitz Encounter project, supporting you with that?
It's an interesting question, because, in our lives, I think that we have certain synchronicities that happen, and when you look back across your life, you might have people that come in and out of your life. One of the people that is in my sphere right now, and basically is one of the administrators of the group called the ATIP group on Facebook that I'm an administrator of, his name is Joe Mergia, and he has a blog called UFO Joe. So, I've known him for decades. We basically worked in television back in the 90s when I first came to Florida. And I didn't know at that time he had an interest in UFOs, other than, in passing. Later on, I ran into him in Gulf Breeze at a UFO conference up there. And kind of knew, wow. And he was doing a newsletter at that time as well. So I became interested in that, subscribed to his newsletter and so on. He went on to be the DP at the History Channel's Pawn Stars show for many, many years and was out in Vegas. He's still out there. So he came back into it, you know, during the whole Nimitz thing and the whole To the Stars thing. And so we kind of contacted each other, and, you know, he's an admin in my group, and we communicate on an almost daily basis. We sort of bounce stuff off each other, you know, and he was there when I was talking about the female pilot, and people were saying I was crazy, kind of giving me advice. So there are people like that, I think, for all of us that have been around, and you're like, wow, that was unrelated to UFOs back in the 90s, but now he's an administrator in my group, completely unrelated to television in a way.
Understood. Some of these questions are from, let me put it this way, high-profile person in the UFO community who I will not name. Now, if you've already answered the question, just let me know, and we'll move on to the next one. You recently ran into some problems with Commander Fravor over the use of his image in the video. I believe he only approved this for TTSA. Was any civil action taken against you for this? I hope not. Your work was far better than the renderings of the History Channel's episode Unidentified. You already covered that. Isn't that correct, Dave?
Yeah, no action. Basically, as I said, he asked for his interview to be taken out of the film. I just simply took his interview out of the film. That was what happened. So
understood. Again, if there's any questions you feel you've already answered, just let me know. This is still from a high-profile person in the community that does not want to be named. This is a continuation of their questions. The Roosevelt case does not have the witness testimonies like the USS Nimitz had, and SCU, the Scientific Coalition for UAPs, stated it has not seen enough data and sequencing of events for the many instances of observations claimed. The videos go fast and gimbal, lack essential data, information, and any assumptions about such things as speed and what transpired are insufficient to reach any conclusions. I do not anticipate another one of your fine videos until you too get data. Is this correct, Dave?
Yes, absolutely. Right now we have witness testimony and we have some FLIR videos, but we don't have enough information at this point to really, if you're talking about a recreation like I did with the Nimitz, there were multiple documents that we could source from. We had information from the radar ship, we had information from the pilots, we had information from the FLIR, we had all these testimonies and so on to create a story. Right now, the USS Roosevelt, we don't have that. We have some pieces, and there's a lot of patchworks that are sort of blank at this point. So, maybe in the future, I'd really love to do one based on the Roosevelt stuff. So we'll see.
I'll let you know when his questions stop, just so you're aware. I know that you had a wonderful opportunity to be with the crew of the ships. That must have been very rewarding for you. What was the most rewarding about the meetup? Again, I think that was a good question that I kind of covered. I would answer it the same way, that, just having the friendship basically of these guys and being able to hang out with them and talk to them and get to know them, just as people, not even as witnesses, really was something that was unexpected. And, to me, it was probably one of the best things. Also, it's fair to say that you now have friendships for life.
Yeah.
Next question. What other videos have you done and are being planned?
I am planning to, at this point, the next step for me, I do plan on releasing the interviews that each of the witnesses provided to me. I couldn't use everything on the film itself, so there's other content in those interviews, and I'm going to make those available to everybody. The other thing that I'm doing is I'm working with a wonderful guy that's volunteering his time to help do audio sweetening on the program. There's some issues with the audio track, but it's simply because it's a low budget process and I didn't have the time, and he's taking the time. It's his expertise and he's doing that for free, so I really appreciate that. And once that comes out, I'll make sure I talk about it. So that's the next kind of part of this documentary.
What is your long-term goals or objectives with the UFO subject?
Right now for me, it's day to day. Again, I do hope to form that network. That's a long-term goal. The other goals is to continue looking at some of the cases that are emerging at this point. The Roosevelt case is still emerging, trying to connect the dots, try to find more information, do FOIAs. We're hoping that this continues, that more and more of this comes forward and that the public is more accepting of it, the news media and so on.
Do you have any reason to believe that we will all know more about the encounters with the military, or do you see this as being classified and the public getting fed the information they want to feed us?
It always seems like it's only what they want to feed us. And of course, in the case of the ATIP and Luis Elizono's resignation and the formation of To the Stars, it seems kind of like an anomaly in itself. It doesn't seem like the normal status quo. Even with the civilian research efforts such as, BASS with Robert Bigelow and that group, all of that information that went into that study is not available to anybody else. It doesn't benefit the public. I would like to see more of this go into the academic world, like the SCU, the Scientific Coalition UAP study. And I think that that if Congress can get involved and they can do briefings and so on, that funding should be allocated not only to the military and defense budgets, but to academic research grants, because we need to figure this out. We don't just need to build weapon systems to defend against it. I mean, that's one way of thinking, but why not put money into scientific study of it? There's a lot of really good minds out there that might be able to figure this out.
This is the last one. Reporting from the high-profile individual that had his set of questions for you. Reporting UFOs is only the first part of the process. The second part is investigating claims and eliminating IFOs. Do you believe the Navy and Air Force will conduct investigations?
I think that they probably will, with their own pilots and service members that have significant encounters. I do believe that they will. And who's to say that they haven't in the past? I think that that's hidden from the public. I mean, if a military pilot, I have to say that some of these guys from the Nimitz said that they have reported it and no one seemed to care. So again, I can't be sure that I'm not privy to that information. I do hope that they do take it seriously. I hope that they investigate the reports from their pilots, and I hope that they continue to eliminate the ones that are IFOs, for instance. I think that there should be some way for the public as well to report things. At this point, as you know, there really is no official program. If you try to report something, people are very frustrated, even if they see something significant, say near an airport or something that they feel is a safety issue, unless it's, I don't know that if you called in a report that you would just be told to, if you called the police, they would tell you to call the Air Force. If you call the Air Force, they would tell you to call the police. Then finally, they would tell you to call MUFON in the end.
Or they might tell you to call Peter Davenport.
So I hope that they really should create an agency. I'm not sure if it's under NASA or
right.
what department, but there should be some office that handles it.
We don't have Project Blue Book anymore, so I think you're right. It's about time. Now, Tom Whitmore, formerly of MUFON, I believe he may have retired from that organization. I'll have to double check on that. But Tom Whitmore, He wants to know, A, what, if any, parties confiscated information regarding the incidents from the ship, government agency, and or department?
You know, the guys that handed over the stuff, namely Gary Voorhees and Patrick, Hughes, said that they didn't recognize the guys that took it. They, of course, their chain of command that were leading these guys into their spaces to retrieve the classified data, they knew them because that was their CEO. But the guys in tow, Patrick says they were United States Air Force officers. He recognized the insignia, but he didn't recognize any other unit or anything like that. Gary said the guys that came aboard were just plain clothes guys. So at this point, we don't know who they were or what their intentions were.
Wouldn't it be safe to say or assume that it could not just have been any Joe off the street, that it definitely would have had to have been a government-related party of folks who went in there to gather this information and take it away? Because how could that information have leaked to the public so that folks could then disguise themselves, so to speak, as officials when they're not? Or was there a possibility of that?
No, both individuals, both Navy vets, said that the people that were there basically were with their chain of command. Okay. I mean, the commanding officers. So, from what they said, they had authority. They would have had command above the people on the ship. Now, what those vetting processes are for that type of thing, boarding a military ship and so on, I'm sure that protocol is all in place.
Understood. Another question concerning the water turbulence indicated in episode 1 of Unidentified. Was this from an underwater UFO? In other words, USO. That was that USO question I had wanted to ask you from Tom Whitmore.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, we still don't know. There has been conjecture about sonar contacts during this event, but as Gary has learned recently, at least the Princeton apparently didn't have any contacts. In some of the official documents, the USS Louisville, the Los Angeles class attack submarine that was there in the strike group, did not have sonar contacts. And the pilots didn't really see exactly what was under the water, if there was something there, what was causing it. So at this point, I don't think we know.
Tom's last question, do you believe the U.S. Navy is capable of tracking UFOs underwater?
Yeah, I believe that they're capable of tracking it. I'm not entirely convinced there isn't some type of program specifically with the submarine service in the Navy that doesn't report unidentified contacts. The term fast movers is thrown around a lot. And, in some reports, that's an official term, official designation of these underwater contacts that a submarine might have anywhere in the world that's traveling at speeds that exceed any kind of conventional craft that we have.
Understood. Just so you know, there's quite a few people who had wanted to talk to you today, so I actually could not take all of their questions because there were so many people. But I do just have a few people left who wanted to ask you questions. Do you have time for that? And I did want to let you know that this will actually be a part 2 is what we're going to do with this. So we'll have the show on Sunday at noon, West Coast time, with the Nimitz gentlemen and other gentlemen that want to be able to share their stories. And then there's going to be a special part 2 with just you. Okay?
Yeah, that sounds good. Otherwise, people are going to have to plan half their day to listen to all this content.
Right, yes. So I'm going to go ahead and ask those other folks questions right now. Ray Bros wants to know this. With so many people reporting a conscious connection either before or after an encounter, such as Kevin Day has described, I would ask Dave if they have experienced something similar or ask them. Do you have any input on that?
Yeah, One thing that I didn't expect in the email address in the in the film that I asked people to contact me if they've had encounters was people contacting me that wanted to talk about these post effects. I have had Navy and other military service branch members contact me wanting to talk about that. In some cases, they want to tell me that, the sightings themselves aren't the real thing to focus on, that actually it's part of something much bigger that is going to be, happening. And, it's sort of interesting. I have an open mind. I don't, try to shut these people down in any way. I'm not sure. So if somebody's telling me that, I'll listen to them. I've had other people that have had sightings, profound sightings, that have said that it's been truly troubling to them. Even all these years, it could be, many years later, that they're still having experiences, and it's been very troubling to them. Here's something interesting. I get those comments, but then I've also been contacted by people that, clinical psychologists and people that do regression and so on, that are saying, hey, if you have anybody that needs to talk to anybody that is, or needs help, I'm willing to help. So there's sort of both sides of it. And I found that quite surprising. And I don't know that the full story isn't related to something much bigger,
Understood. Ray Bros still had more questions. Added to the above, Commander Fravor reported seeing a cube within a sphere. For other eyewitnesses, especially those pilots who may have got a relatively close view, did they also witness this effect? And could this could the sphere be described as a solid object or more of an atmospheric anomaly? In other words, a field distortion around the inner object, with the Atom Project suggesting negative mass field generators. Could this explain the phenomenon?
Well, yeah, I think he's talking about the reports by Lieutenant Graves and Aucoin of the USS Roosevelt in 2015, describing them seeing at least I don't think it was them, but one of their squadron mates seeing a sphere that looked like almost like an opaque beach ball that had a cube inside of it, and that they almost had a midair collision with this thing. It flew between two of their jets. Now, what that could be, I have no idea. There's been several people that have proposed that this might be some type of radar balloon that's in use, and that they weren't aware that was there. I have really, again, this is the Roosevelt thing, and I don't think we have enough information. It's just basically one statement. We don't even know how big it is. We don't know, if it was rotating, if it was glowing. There's just so many questions at this point that need to be answered.
I want to make it clear to our listeners what the Atom Project means. That is affiliated with To the Stars Academy of Arts and Science. The Atom Research Project is an academic research program focused on exotic materials for technology innovation. Next question, still Ray Bros. With naval and Air Force bases close by to the field operations during these encounters and days of possible notification due to the Princeton's tracking days prior to the pilots' encounters, could the Air Force response team reported as taking the data tapes been dispatched from there?
Oh, yeah. I mean, and there's two parts to that. First of all, absolutely. It's probably San Diego, and that area is one of the most highly monitored naval warning areas and operations areas. Yeah, also have the facilities on San Clemente Island, which is also, has a whole base and radar system there. If something was going on, all of those different commands are going to be aware of it. And if indeed they were aware of it starting back on the November 10th, and by the 16th, they would have been very aware of it. And the fact that these airplanes were seeing these things, they may have, come right out, like a 30-minute hop from the Naval Air Station out there to the ship. So I don't see any reason why not. Now, the second part of that is in these encounters, why is it that they all seem to be around these Navy operations areas? Like in each case, with the Roosevelt and the Nimitz events, these are, training areas that the Navy controls, and there's bases and so on in those areas. I start thinking, well, what are some other bases? What are some other Navy bases on our coast? So maybe we should start looking there, because these UFOs seem to be only appearing, well, not only, but, in these cases around those areas. So if we had to predict, we should look at other similar Navy training areas.
Understood. Last, Ray Bro's question. Was there any reporting to the higher command done, or potential monitoring of chatter those days prior to alert, what surely was a response team? Dave, with such a positive response to your first two efforts to document this encounter, have you been approached to expand upon them with professional funding or to produce a show of your own?
As far as reporting it, I do know that the guys on the ships, again, I can't speak for everybody. I know that on the Princeton, Kevin and, his crew there did try to send it up the chain of command. And for the most part, they were ignored. They were told that, it's just ice crystals or something like that. So, going back to the Nimitz and the reporting of that event, I think it did go up to the fleet, and it didn't go any further. And that information can be found in, I believe it's the executive summary report that is on the To the Stars Academy website. No one has offered me a film deal. Hi, I'm here. If you want to send me a film deal, give me a call. Let's talk. Let's do lunch, because we can make a film.
Yes, right. Sorry, Ray. I didn't realize those were two questions there in that last cluster of the paragraph that you sent me, so I apologize for that. But yes, thank you for having answered that. Kirk Morgan has a question for you. Perhaps you can maybe glean from this sentence what he's asking. One could be if they had seen any anomalies on the older radar systems. Maybe he's asking a question there about older radar systems.
I'm going to sort of assume what he's talking about. And in the unidentified program, when they talk about the USS Roosevelt event, the pilots start talking about seeing objects when they had newer radars upgraded. And the Navy F-A-18F Super Hornets did get an upgrade to the radar system, and those began, I think, around 2005. And this was called the APG-79 ASA radar, and they were installing these back then. So I would assume that the Roosevelt in 2015, 2014 had that specific radar installed. And it did seem like what they were talking about in the show was something that happened that year that gave them this capability, and they all started seeing stuff that they hadn't seen the year before. I started researching that, and I found a technology called IRST, Infrared Search and Track, that was deployed around that time. And this is a technology I think that might have come out of Lockheed or Boeing, and it's basically an infrared sensor that's attached to the centerline fuel tank on the Super Hornet jet. And according to what I researched, it said it gives the pilots long-range infrared scanning and tracking of airborne targets. And I'm like, wow, that sounds like exactly what could have allowed them to maybe start seeing UFOs if they suddenly got this new sensor attached to their jet in addition to the radar. So I'm going to follow up on that and find more information about that sensor and see if that, as we move forward in this case, becomes true, that they say, yeah, that's what allowed us to, track these UFOs.
These questions are from an extremely well-known person who is iconic in the ufology community. And I believe some of these questions have already been answered. So let's just go ahead and do it this way. If you feel you've answered them, you can just say so, and I'll move on to the next question. Over the years you have been flying, have other pilots chatted up encounters with UAPs they have had?
Can you repeat that one more time? Like over the years?
I think what he meant to ask is, over the years you have been flying, have other pilots chatted you up with encounters with UAPs they have had?
Well, I think that would be probably more, aimed at one of the pilots.
I think that's what he meant. Yeah, right, because you don't fly. Isn't that correct?
No.
Yeah, and so that's probably what he meant that for. What he did was he wrote a series of questions for me to ask folks on the show, and I think he rightfully assumed that you were going to be on the panel, and some of these are for you and some of these are for them. So I'll go ahead and look for the ones that could be for you. It'll just take a moment. Okay, I'll ask you this one. Are you aware of the huge database of pilot sightings built up over several decades by Dr. Richard Haynes at NASA?
No, I'm not. I mean, I'd be interested to definitely research that, though.
Okay. The next one is, I know this is a bit sensitive, so let me ask this way. Are you comfortable with the explanation these UAPs being reported are controlled by non-human intelligence from elsewhere?
I think that that's a theory. I mean, there's many theories that have been proposed, and, that's one of them. I mean, I'm not, at this point, I'm sort of a non-biased skeptic that is trying to find answers, and I don't think that we have the answers yet. So I think the answers are out there. We just have to keep looking at the observations that are being presented to us, and eventually, if we can continue with that, that I hope one day in my lifetime we'll have more answers.
Can you envision a full congressional hearing specifically for military pilots who have had UAP encounters?
Well, I think that, if we have a significant enough event that's going to be demanded. I mean, it depends. I think at this point, I can't really see that, but perhaps as we move forward with, the military's reporting of these events, if this continues and there's no sort of explanation, if our military cannot provide that, maybe that Congress would get involved, just like say, we need to form a committee. We need to investigate this. We need to get answers, because this is a matter of national security. This is a matter of airspace safety. We have, civilian jets flying crisscross across the globe. If there's technology out there that can shut down, for instance, a civilian aircraft, would you want to be flying around in this thing? We don't know what it is, actually can shut off a jet that you're flying in. I don't want to be in that jet. If this technology is out there, I want to find out where it's coming from, how it works, whose technology it is, and there should be congressional inquiry if that happens. I mean,
did you notice the many articles published during the last presidential election about connections between the Clinton campaign, team, and UAPs?
I looked into that a little bit. I mean, there has been some conjecture that if Clinton was elected, her team was going to press much more into this idea that the government has UFO information that's not being, presented to the general public, and that it would be presented. And of course, that didn't happen. She wasn't elected, and so that whole idea and program never took place. I would just read about it, but I don't know too much about it.
Are you aware that billionaire space entrepreneur Robert Bigelow stated on 60 Minutes in May of 2017 that extraterrestrials are visiting Earth now?
That's right. Yeah, I mean, I think that is a pretty iconic interview for somebody that is, doing contract work for NASA with the inflatable space habitats and the other, work that he does for U.S. government. As you know, Robert Bigelow was also contracted under the ATIP and OSAP programs to study UAPs. He seems convinced. Now, I don't know that he's ever provided an explanation for those comments. I mean, he said he doesn't give a damn if anyone believes him or not. He knows it. Well, I think for the rest of us, maybe we don't have that luxury to not give a damn about whether somebody believes us or not. I mean, that's why I don't say I know they're real, because I don't know. If he knows, I'd like to know what his proof is and what his evidence.
Well, any advanced technology of unknown origin is a potential threat. Do you think the UAPs you encountered are a threat at this time? That would be for one of the pilots. Let me move on to the next one. Do you expect other pilots and support crew to come forward in the near future? I think we covered that.
Yeah, I mean, I hope that we have more air crew that come forward. If you look at both the Roosevelt and you look at the Nimitz, for instance, you have multiple fighter squadrons, and within each of those squadrons, you have dozens and dozens of pilots and jets. And if you're talking about years of deployment and so on, there has to be hundreds and hundreds. If there's 2 guys that came forward or 3 guys that came forward, there's probably hundreds of people that have had these encounters. We just haven't heard from them yet.
You're going to be very happy when I tell you this. There's only 2 questions left. One is from Ryan Sprague, and one is from myself.
Awesome.
The one from Ryan Sprague is, just the latest with the gimbal and go fast videos. Is the info on the unidentified show aligning with the extensive research Dave is doing on tracking more Roosevelt members down?
As far as I've found from our research, it kind of lined up. Now, again, we had names of pilots from the Roosevelt incident. We hadn't made contact with them. It's my understanding that the SCU, the Scientific Coalition of Ufology, has had some contact with USS Roosevelt personnel. I don't know if they were pilots or not. I'm not privy to that particular witness, but from everything that I've heard, it has all lined up. I mean, I haven't seen anything diverge from that. I mean, nothing in unidentified, even with the USS Princeton, as far as, the idea of seeing the objects through the big eye on the ships, which in some ways has been in dispute. That's been, shown in that program as being factual, with Sean Cahill. The underwater stuff, I mean, there's a lot of reports of that in unidentified as far as underwater UFOs being observed, especially off the Baja. I mean, Kevin Day's account of the objects on radar, the groups, he calls them fleets of UFOs, or it was raining UFOs. That's all been, covered in that program. Yeah, I mean, everything that I know and everything in my documentary, I mean, the one thing perhaps they don't address in unidentified is these guys coming aboard and taking classified data bricks, but it hasn't been discounted either, refuted in any way, as far as I know.
2 things regarding what you said, and I know you already know this. You just said this out of habit, which I do all the time. This Scientific Coalition for Ufology was changed to Scientific Coalition for UAPs. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is I will, of course, be coming back to you later to ask for your statement on a review of all of the History Channel's unidentified shows, because I know you've been watching them, and your statement to us is very important regarding your reviews of those shows. The last question I have for you, Dave, is this. From the point that you started this project regarding the Nimitz encounter and the evolution of it, what is your takeaway overall? And I don't mean just with the documentary. I mean with the natural inclination to want to network, to find more people, to add to the film or talk to them. The entire experience, sort of a panoramic view in every angle possible. What is your takeaway? What have you learned from everything that you've done regarding the inception of your project to now and everything else that goes along with it?
Well, from the very beginning, I think that I had an idea that anyone could do anything that they want to do. You don't have to ask for permission. So there may be a group that's called To the Stars. There may be a government that's studying this phenomena. If somebody wants to do their own project, for instance, make a film about the event and contact every single person. And they're not a Hollywood studio. They're just one person. Well, why not? I didn't ask permission to do a film. You know, if I called somebody, I'm not saying I'm from the History Channel. I'm just saying, hi, I'm Dave. I'm doing a film. And, you know, I think that in some ways people expect there's some notoriety or there's some kind of monetary reward for doing this, and they're not going to participate if I'm not the government. I'm not going to participate. I don't want to be in your film because you're not the History Channel. You're not ABC News. I have no interest in what you're doing because you're nobody. Well, I am somebody. I'm me, and I think anybody can do it. All you have to do is have the willpower. You have to have persistence. You have to have dedication. You have to put the sweat into any project that you're doing, and this project's a prime example, because when I started, I had nothing, and a year later, I have a film with 1.8 million views, and some people like it, and some people don't. But you know, what can I say? It's something that anyone can do, and that's like studying this phenomenon as well. If you want to study it, go study it. I think anyone can do it, and I think that's what we need actually to find the answers, is to have people that are out there that have good ideas, that are interested and want to put the time in. Those are the people that are probably going to solve this, not some, you know, company out there that's trying to make $1 million, you know?
You managed to cover a part of the ufology topic that nobody has in the respect that you did. And I really want to congratulate you on your incredible efforts that you have put forth. And whether you like it or not, you've become a deeply respected icon in the ufology community. I just want to thank you for having taken all of that time and effort, not just on your behalf, but on all of our behalf, to be able to represent something so historical and so important for all of posterity. So thank you so much for having done that, and I just want to extend my gratitude to you.
Well, I mean, thank you. I appreciate that, Chant. Those are really nice words to say. And, you know, I mean, I don't know that we don't congratulate ourselves enough in this field. I mean, there's a lot of negativity out there, but I think that, you know, anybody that's putting an effort in and trying to help, we're trying to help find answers. We're trying to uncover this mystery and understand it, and, you know, shine light on it, for instance. And everybody that's doing that, I think, deserves credit. And I appreciate you recognizing the stuff that I'm doing. So.
Well, actually, I think millions of people have, and it wasn't just 1.8 million people who saw that video on the YouTube channel that you have it on, but it's also the 1.5 million people that saw it on Amazon. So literally millions and millions of people have watched your documentary repeatedly, and I would like for you, if you don't mind, to mention the name of your channel so that they can actually have the benefit and privilege of watching that amazing Nimitz Encounter film.
Sure. I mean, if you go on YouTube and you just punch in the Nimitz Encounters and hit return, it'll probably show up like right in on the top level of that. You know, you sometimes get it with other links in there, but that's the one way to find it. If you go to the website, theNimitzEncounters.com, you'll also find a link there. If you're interested in downloading the film, I've been working with John Greenwald of theblackvault.com, and he was gracious enough to give me space on his high-speed server to host the file. So if you're interested in downloading the film, for instance, to show people at home or something, you know, or even to put it on your own channel, which I encourage, that's fine with me. You can download the film there.
What is the name of your channel on YouTube?
The Nimitz Encounters.
Okay, I just wanted to make that clear. Thank you, Dave, for having been on our show today. I'm very grateful to you, and it was a privilege and honor to have interviewed you.
Well, I appreciate, you know, the work that you're doing, Chant, and, you know, Frank as well. And, you know, you guys have supported us and the Navy Witnesses going back from the very beginning. I think you guys were the first ones to contact us, so we really appreciate it as well.
Thank you. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks.